New Orleans, coming to you from the Toyota studio at Radio Row. I am Robert Mays. Joining me today, it is the senior NFL insider at The Athletic, Dianna Russini. Dan, how are you?
Hi, viewers at home. I want to apologize for the glitter that you may see.
I was wondering when you were going to bring this up.
You need to immediately address this, because if you're watching this from home on your phone, maybe you're on a commute right now, you're thinking, man, Mays definitely had some fun early this morning, maybe this afternoon, in places he shouldn't be hanging out as a married man, but that is not the case.
That is not the case at all. You guys will see a little bit later in the show. I had to pay off the wins pool bet from the Athletic Football Show earlier today. Me and Derek Klassen picked 5 teams before the season. Fewest combined wins at the end of the year, had to pay off a bet on Radio Row. I had my face painted like a small child. And when she started doing it, there were 2 moments where I was like, this is going to be a little bit more intense than I thought. When she started painting my mustache, and then she took out what I would call an industrial size bottle of glitter. I'm going to be washing it off of myself for the next week and a half.
Oh, there is a good chance that sweater's done. You're going to find little pieces of glitter in 2028 and be like, oh, I remember that Super Bowl.
If you guys are watching at home, we encourage you, please comment, please like, please subscribe. We're hoping to get to some of your comments and questions a little bit later on the show. We've got a really fun, great lineup for you guys today. We're going to be talking with Andrew Marchand, our senior sports media columnist at The Athletic, about the Tom Brady wrinkle to this Super Bowl. You had some great conversations this morning with Kirk Cousins, Drake Maye. So we've got plenty of fun stuff on tap today in day 2 of our live stream.
Yeah, it was fun to talk to a quarterback who has been doing this for as many years as Kirk Cousins has, and talk to a young gun in Drake Maye, and just such a difference in just delivery of answers Super Bowl week.
But Kirk, this is old hat for him at this point.
Oh, please. He could host the show, which he did such a good job when he was on set on one of the networks doing some pregame stuff, like weirdly good. Like, go Kirk. So he definitely has a second career once he decides to hang it up. But according to him, he is not done playing football. He still has a lot left in him. So we'll get to that interview soon.
Kirk's landing spot this offseason is going to be a source of intrigue. Another player who got the news cycle kicked off in a big way yesterday afternoon was Cooper Kupp, who came out publicly and said that it seems like the Rams are going to try to trade him this offseason. So this is the second day in a row that we're starting off the show, with a pretty big bombshell news-wise. What have you heard about the Cooper Kupp Rams situation, and where do you think this currently sits right now?
Yeah, this is like the NFL's way of biting back at the NBA. Like, hey, you guys wanted to own the news cycle with the Lucas stuff, but we got you. Here goes Miles, here goes Cooper. Obviously, the Miles thing is such a bigger story to me, only because this is a player that just wants to leave because he wants to go play on a winning team.
And he's a superstar. He's the reigning defense player of the year from last year.
Cooper Kupp, though, has been part of the fabric of this Rams team. He's won a Super Bowl with them. He's beloved by this organization. But let's just go back to, just a few weeks before the NFL trade deadline. And Mike Silver and I were reporting that the Rams were shopping him. They had reached out to the Steelers, the Chiefs, the Buffalo Bills, to just get a gauge of what his market would look like, and see if there was any takers out there who were looking to maybe possibly add a piece to make a deep season run. And it wound up falling apart, and they obviously didn't move him. But Cooper was aware of it. He heard, he saw, he knows, and the team had a conversation with him about it. And the reality is, from then to now, everyone knew that this was going to come to a head, and now it's come to a head. This is always about contract. He wants more money. The Rams don't want to give him more money, and so now this will be a divorce.
From the Rams side of it, I understand it. They're at sort of this interesting pivot moment where you have these two kind of aging pieces of a previous core in him and Matthew Stafford, and then you have a core of young pieces that I think they're excited about. If they move on from Cooper Kupp this offseason, they would save about $12.5 million against the cap. It would give them about $50 million in cap space. That's a new terrain for this team. They've been kind of scrimping by on the margins for a while just because they've already paid a lot of these guys. And I think this signal of we're willing to move on from Cooper Kupp and maybe willing to move on from Matthew Stafford feels like an indication that this team is kind of ready to step into the next era of whatever the McVay Rams are going to feel like.
It's fun to talk about the Rams being in this position of flexibility, right? And they're making these moves, and Les Snead and Sean McVay are doing this, knowing that, okay, we're back. Because it's hard to remember that they've been strapped a bit because McVay's gotten so much out of this roster and so much out of this team. And during the trade deadline, if you recall, the Rams weren't doing well. So it made sense to me at the time. It still makes sense to me as to why they want to move on from this contract. But this new era of Rams football is going to look the way it did really at the start of McVay's reign in LA. Because now they've got money and they just need to make a decision at the quarterback position. But to have to say goodbye and move on from a Cooper Kupp, I think that's just a really big deal for that locker room, for what he brings and his relationship with Matthew Stafford. They have breakfast every morning, the stories that we all report about them. So this was a hard conversation to have, I'm sure, because it was difficult back around the trade deadline. But this is the business of football.
I also think in a lot of ways, even going back to like 2018 and like the early stages of the McVay Rams, Cooper Kupp always felt like an expression of who this Rams team was. And you can do that from a more of a culture sort of point of view, but you can also look at a nuts and bolts football thing. The way that they were able to play with 3 receivers on the field, but make it feel like you had a tight end out there, in large part, that was because of the way that Cooper Kupp played. So when you go back all the way to like when we all kind of came to understand who McVay's Rams would be, a lot of that was expressed through Cooper Kupp specifically. So the fact that he's ready to move on, or they're ready to move on from him, this really does feel like the closing of a chapter for that entire organization.
You know how yesterday we talked about what are the Cleveland Browns without Myles Garrett? It's hard to understand the identity of that team without Myles, because what's the shiny piece? What's the interesting part of them? Let's just say, for this conversation, they move on from Matthew Stafford because they don't want to pay him. And maybe Sean McVay has his eye on someone else. So no Matthew Stafford, no Cooper Kupp. Who are the Rams? Like, how do you view them as just putting themselves in a great position to get younger and better, perhaps?
I think that Puka kind of has taken up that mantle a little bit. When you think about his skill set and how unique it is, I think they have been able to build the offense through that. And the offensive line is still coming back mostly intact. Alaric Jackson, their left tackle, is a free agent, but a lot of those pieces are going to be back in the fold. Their ability to run the ball now, the way they can with Kyron Williams and then build the passing game through Puka, I think that's fine on the offensive side. And then on defense, you've just got those terrors up front. And I think building it around the pass rush, Puka, and the running game, that makes sense to me. Obviously, the biggest domino you have to fall, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the show, is what happens with Stafford. Because then I think that's a huge departure from whatever the previous iteration was. And that's really a signal that we're embracing what feels like a new era.
And I feel like with most teams, if you told me that this veteran quarterback that's won a Super Bowl is a good business decision, and I would be questioning the team. But when you have a coach like Sean McVay who has this ability to get the most out of pretty much any quarterback at this point, I don't panic as much. Do I think he wants Matthew Stafford back? Yes. I think that entire coaching staff does. But I don't think that there should be any concern at the quarterback position if they lose Matthew Stafford, knowing that maybe they can get a guy like Sam Darnold.
I would be fascinated to watch what the Rams offense would look like with a different quarterback, because that offense became an expression of Matthew Stafford in the same way the old offense was kind of an expression of Jared Goff. So what the Rams would look like with a different skill set in there, that's something we may have to tackle. What another offense is going to look like with Cooper Kupp is now the biggest question for me. If he's going to move on, if the Rams are going to move on from him, where does he make the most sense? He's at $12.5 million base salary next year, which if you're looking at potential options, like to me, the two guys skill set wise that I would compare that might be available this spring are like him and Chris Godwin. If you'd rather not pay Chris Godwin $18 million a year and you'd rather have sort of a shorter term answer, is Cooper Kupp going to be an option for a team like the Steelers who need receiver help, or the Bengals who may move on from T. Higgins? Are there any other teams that, as you think about early partners with the Kupp trade, that makes sense to you?
Yeah, let's go back to the teams that we're calling and that we're having conversations. The Buffalo Bills. I think what we saw Josh Allen do with the options he had at receiver, he did a great job, but I think it's very clear they need a bigger player. They need a bigger piece. They need a star. And I think Cooper Kupp could fit there. I do think the cost may be a little much for Buffalo.
They already gave away 3 for Amari Cooper. I mean, they're already dealing with fewer draft picks than a lot of other teams.
Which is also why they didn't trade for him before the trade deadline. It just was going to cost them that much. But I do believe that the Rams are going to be willing to take on some of his contract to make sure that he moves on and goes to a place he wants to go, which tells you they're really ready to move on, right? Like when I tell you that they're willing to do some of that, that always says like, all right, they've come to a point where both sides are just ready for this thing to split.
I've got a couple juicy ones that I want to throw out here. Nick Caley just got hired to be the Texans offensive coordinator. Stephon Diggs is hitting free agency. Tank Dell is not going to be healthy when next season starts. I think that Cooper Kupp's skill set aligned with Nico Collins' skill set and what is going to be an offense that he is familiar with. I'm already paying attention to that because I actually think it makes sense on a lot of different levels. That one's fun to me. I like the Cardinals. If you think about the receiver types that the Cardinals have right now, a slot option in Cooper Kupp's vein as like more of a possession guy, I think makes sense for them. And then the other team, who's about to lose DeAndre Hopkins, we'll see what happens with Rashee Rice coming back, are the Chiefs a potential destination for a Cooper Kupp this offseason as they're seeking out more receivers?
Right now, Brett Beach is on the phone. He's getting Myles Garrett and Cooper Kupp before Sunday's game.
Why do you keep trying to do this? You're just going to break the will of so many people who don't want to see the Chiefs keep doing this. You're trying to put every good player in the league on this Kansas City team.
I'm just trying to milk this story too. I love this idea of them making some big move while they're focused in on winning their third straight Super Bowl. But again, the Chiefs were one of those teams that were poking around on that. And again, a lot of this had to do with why the Chiefs didn't bring him on was his salary. But now that the league will soon find out that the Rams are willing to take some of that on, I think he'll have way more suitors.
We alluded to this a little bit earlier. You guys are about to see a clip of me looking absolutely ridiculous as I pay off this bet. And we're going to get to our conversation with me and Michael Pittman from earlier today right now.
Coming into the season, I was really excited about what you guys could be at offense. Yeah, I thought the flashes in 23 were really intriguing. And I actually thought Anthony played pretty well in that 4-game stretch that we saw. And Shane has done such a great job in his career. And it probably didn't go the way that you guys wanted it to go last season. At what point, because I'm sure you have a similar level of excitement. You're watching people in camp. You guys have a lot of talent. At what point, whether it's during training camp or into the season, do you guys realize this is maybe going to be more of a process than we hoped it was going to be?
Yeah, I mean, you have to expect that development doesn't happen overnight, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to compete, right? So, like, we're going to go out there and compete whether we think we have a chance or not, right? And like, that's not me saying that I didn't think we'd have a chance, but like, that's just how, like any type of competition, like you go out there because you never know what happens. Like, the best team doesn't always win, like in football, right? And like, you've seen teams that you didn't expect to do certain things go on and achieve things that nobody had like planned for them, right? So, so I guess just the short answer is you have to, like, you can't expect like overnight success as much as it seems like that, like with some guys. It's like it's just not that common, and football is a development, like, for everybody, right? Like whether you're year 1 or you're year 15, like, everybody is continuing to develop in every stage of their career.
In terms of like how accountability works in an NFL building, I'm sure there's a push and a pull because you want coaches that you feel like care about you and you want a good relationship with those people. But because it is such a demanding job, that consistent accountability has to be part of the equation. So when you've been around coaches that you think do that well, what does that balance feel like? Where you feel like you're getting pushed, but at the same time, there's a level of care about the roster.
Yeah. I always appreciate brutal honesty, but there's a difference between honesty and being disrespected. And the coaches who can be brutally honest with you, like, I feel like Reggie Wayne is the best at this, right? Because he is brutally honest, but he's not trying to disrespect you, and he really wants you to be the best player that you can be, and players can see that. So, like, just like when you have a guy like that, just like that helps you set that standard, and he doesn't really let you get slacked on the things you got to do, because he'll straight up tell you, it's just like, he'll be like, yeah, that sucked, and he will tell you in front of everybody. He doesn't care, which I think is great.
Give me an example. Like, what's something where he really got on you for something this year? You're like, all right, I probably needed to hear that.
Yeah, so I ran a slant route and I caught it, right? And I got the first down, but he kept on playing it. And like, he like just looks at me. He's like, that route stinks. And like, I'm like, what? Like, just like, I got a first down. And like, just like, and then just like then like Brady's like, yeah, but you really could have maybe got 30 yards here. Like, if you would have straightened him up, gave him a step, and then ran in. So like, just like little things like that. Like, even like when you're not expecting it, he's always trying to get you to reach that highest level.
I want to ask you about players in the league, and specifically guys you go against. Is there somebody over the last few years that you've either gone against once, a couple times, that you just really don't like playing against for one reason or another? Not even personality-wise, but like play style.
Yeah, so I don't like playing against Myles Garrett. I certainly didn't like playing against Aaron Donald because TJ Watt too, because those are the guys that can change the way that you game plan. And when those guys are in, you know, offenses have a tendency to like not do certain things. Like, I don't want to give up like our schemes, but
just how long you can hang on to the ball for the most part.
Well, it equals less passes.
Sure.
Like, just like in a game, and with less passes, then obviously we don't get as much opportunity to do our job.
The last thing I'll ask you, if you could steal one single trait from another receiver in the league, what do you think that would be?
Tyreek Hill's speed. 100%.
It's always the thing you don't have as much as you want, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, like, can you imagine being 6'4" and strong and being the fastest player like in the NFL? I mean, that's like Calvin Johnson, right? so yeah.
Joining us here now is the Athletics senior media correspondent, Andrew Marchand. And Andrew, I'm going to ask you a question similar to when I asked Diana at last year's Super Bowl. She hadn't been on the job for that long when she saw me dressed as a hot dog on Radio Row. And I think there was part of her that was second guessing her choices as like a well-respected media professional. As someone now in the same spot and having to sit at the same desk as somebody who looked like that earlier, how do you feel about your decisions?
So when I look at your glitter and also your illustrious career, I feel strong that I really did make a bad decision. If I could do it again, I would change it. If I'd known about the hot dog thing that never came up when I was talking to the Athletic, I didn't know people were going to be with glitter. I regret it.
Speaking of regrets, you on your podcast today was talking about the Tom Brady-Fox marriage. And I think that there's been so much discussion about Fox's investment in Brady and what they got out of him this year. You said, and it feels like you feel pretty strongly about this, that they would do it again if given the opportunity. Why do you say that? Why do you think this has been something that Fox feels has gone well for them when I think a lot of the outside perception is probably to the contrary of that?
Because you want Tom Brady on your side. If you look at again, this is their thinking, not necessarily mine, but it's not only doing the game. And when he does the game, obviously, I think it's a fair thing to say that Greg Olsen, who called the Super Bowl 2 years ago, who was their number one before Tom Brady, is a better analyst than Tom Brady. But when you look at what Brady brings in terms of sponsorships, in terms of cachet, it's a lot. And so is it worth $37.5 million a year? I'm not sure about that. But yeah, I think they do it again.
Would you do it again? If you were in their shoes and you think about the return that they've gotten, if that's their view on it, how do you view the Brady experiment now that we're one season in and on the eve of him calling a Super Bowl?
I would do it again because I cover sports media. So
you need something to talk about.
Not only that, I mean, when you talk about that contract, which, I was the first report in my old job, and you talk about Tom Brady, those are type of stories. The only disappointing thing about Tom Brady is that, to me, he hasn't been amazing and he hasn't stunk. So he's kind of a little bit boring in terms of the actual performance. I know the internet has their opinions, but they have their opinions about everybody, and they're usually everyone stinks. If you look at how he's developed from game one in Cleveland to where he was in the championship game a couple weeks ago and now going to the Super Bowl, he is better. And that comes with the reps, and there's a difference. But I'm interested to see. And the one thing that changes, at least for me, from my perspective in the column I'll write after the Super Bowl, is you grade him as a rookie in the first game in Cleveland. You're doing the Super Bowl. You're the number one analyst for Fox. The money I don't really get into, but you're making a lot of money. There's no curve. So you're either good or you're bad, and that's how personally I'll grade him. And I think also when you look at Tom Brady as compared to Greg Olsen, he's a little bit Drew Henson here in his scenario. If you remember at Michigan, Drew Henson was the golden boy. Everything was designed to have Drew Henson succeed, and they even shared time, even though over time Brady obviously was the better quarterback. So is he Drew Henson, or is he more than that in terms of as a broadcaster? Because Greg Olsen's clearly the better analyst at this time, but Tom Brady is the one who's going to get the chances and still has 9 years remaining on his deal.
You said that he's gotten better this year. Where do you think he's at his best? Like those moments where you think that he's really additive to the broadcast, how does that manifest for you?
I think it's the same as for all analysts. It's telling us something we don't see. He's had some really good moments. Buffalo, I think it was versus the Rams. It was right before the 2-minute warning. He pointed out that I might have my teams mixed up here. I think it was the Bills should pass, not run, because they're going to have to use a timeout before the 2-minute warning. So then they'd only have 2 timeouts. I'm not getting my fact exactly correct, but the idea was not to use the timeout before the 2-minute warning because then you need the onside kick. If you don't get the onside kick, you don't have 3 timeouts, and you're going to lose the game. That's exactly what happened. Only 2 timeouts. Onside kick was lost, and it was really good and stuff you don't hear, and that's what you want from him, and that's what we've gotten from Peyton Manning, for example, on the Manning cast, and so that's what you see from Tom.
The game management stuff and just the flow of the game, not like the decision making, because I think that's where actually Olsen is his strongest. When we're talking about 4th down decisions and some of the analytical thinking, Brady I don't think shines there, but the game management stuff specifically, timeout usage, things like that, that makes sense. The other moment, I think it was in the NFC Championship game, where he was talking about just body language coming out of a route. Those are the types of things where I feel like he really can differentiate himself. Like if that receiver releases inside on that, I'm not even looking at him anymore. That's where I feel like he's really started to pick up on things and interject in the right moments with stuff that you just would never think about if you were watching the game as a fan.
Yeah, like I know some things that have happened over the years, like behind the scenes and how he's gone about it, which I'll probably save for that Super Bowl, post-Super Bowl column. And I think the thing that he's had to adjust is that when they did practice games, for example, he has some really strong opinions about some of these quarterbacks. And I think it was pointed out to him that they like that, they want that, but just realize that when you say something, you're Tom Brady. So, for instance, let's say he was talking about Deshaun Watson, and maybe he doesn't think he was that great a quarterback. He kind of held back a little bit in that first game. And I think that's where also, it's not that you have to be critical. That's always the misnomer that is he going to be critical or not? That's not it. You need to just tell us stuff that's complicated and make it simple. And that's what Greg Olsen does well. That's what Peyton Manning does on the Manning Cast well. And he's gotten better about it. But it's a skill, and it's probably the hardest thing to do in sportscasting is call live games. And so I have seen an improvement with the reps.
Something you mentioned again on your show today was the idea of whether they should approach this game, having Kevin Burkhardt, a little bit differently than they would from a regular season game. What do you mean by that? How would that approach be different for the Super Bowl specifically?
Yeah, I wouldn't do it differently, but I think you have to ask the question. You have a broader audience. Mm-hmm. During the regular season, 15 to 20 million people watch the games. During the playoffs, you go to 40, and then you peak around 60, 65 if you're lucky, one of these networks, for the championship games. Super Bowl, you can have 120 million people. So you could argue broader audience, broader focus. I personally wouldn't do that. Do the game the way you want to. He goes in with a lot of notes, a lot of prepared thoughts, a lot of note cards. He's moved away a little bit from that over the season, in which that's where you kind of go that next level. You can't be reliant. It needs to be second. It needs to be fluent. And obviously he's fluent in football, but can you translate that to an audience so the average person can understand it?
There's going to be a lot of intrigue around his performance in this game. There's going to be a lot of intrigue about the quarterback movement in the NFL this offseason, including a guy who is currently under contract with the Atlanta Falcons, but could be on the move this spring. Kirk Cousins and his landing destination, I think, is going to be a big topic of conversation this offseason. You talked to Kirk a little bit earlier today. Let's get to that interview right now.
The world has now found out what a lot of us have known about you is just how disciplined you are and how hard you work every single day and how structured you live your life to make sure that you're trying to get the best out of yourself. But after you have a year like you did, in just the way you described it, which wasn't at all how you imagined it to go, where are you at mentally? Like, how do you bounce back from that?
It reminds me a little bit of 2014 when I was with Washington. I was backing up, but got put in. And played about 5 or 6 weeks, did some really good things, but also made some errors and ended up getting benched. And, kind of watched the second half of that season from the bench, knowing that if I had played well, I could or should be the one out there, but I didn't play well enough to do that. And, I was kind of reminded of some of those feelings this past year. So, it kind of took me back to that. And then, back in that 2015 offseason, really took a lot of time and energy to respond, come back, and had – a great year in 2015 and was able to kind of build on that. So I'm taking a similar approach now, just saying, hey, it's got to be 2015 all over again. You got to get back on the horse now in 2025 and try to put together your best year up ahead and see where it can lead. But, there's no guarantee. You've got to go earn it and do it. And that's really where my focus is.
So without knowing about anything that's happening behind the scenes, us all just kind of reading the tea leaves, can you tell us what's next for you? Like, where is Kirk Cousins playing next season?
I wish I could. I know I'm under contract with the Falcons, and so that's what I know. And we haven't had conversations. I'm sure we will come March, but still just kind of early. We just have to wait and see see what the Falcons' vision is and go from there. And just know that I would love to keep playing, and we'll see what happens.
All right. I know you don't want to get into the Super Bowl too much because, as you said, it's just kind of hard to watch and take it all in if you're not here. But what these quarterbacks are up against because you played both these teams. You played the Eagles. You played the Chiefs. So who do you think's got the tougher job figuring out the defense on Sunday? Is this going to be Jalen or Patrick based on what you recall that you saw earlier in the season?
Yeah, we played the Eagles week 2, and at that time, you don't really have a sample size to go off of to know quite what you're going against. And it was later in the year when I looked back to see, where defenses ranked. The Eagles, I think at the time when I looked late in the year, were like second in total defense. So really, really good defense. I think that goes back to Vic Fangio. It goes back to, Jalen Carter, the great pass rush they have. Darius Slay's always been an elite corner. So, we had a hard time moving the ball against them in our game, but I didn't leave the field saying, that's the best defense we'll play all year. And yet, looking back, it very well may have been. So, just a really good unit, and I think it's a big reason why they're in the Super Bowl. Spags and the Chiefs defense, they do such a good job. And I think what they do and what the team of the Chiefs does so well is just find the inches, find a way to win. They've done it now all season, and it's hard to bet against a team that does that. And as good as the Eagles are, as much as they control the line of scrimmage, when you're a team that just no matter what finds a way to win, that's what this league's all about.
So with those defensive players that you played against, and again, earlier in the season, is there one defensive player that's going to be out on the field, you think, in the Superdome that's one of those guys that is just a nightmare for quarterbacks?
Yeah, they both have one at the same position, that 3-technique interior defensive line position. They can move those guys around, but it's Jalen Carter and Chris Jones. Different body types, but really the same level of dominance where you need to have a plan for them. And if you one-on-one pass protect them much of the game, eventually they will ruin your day. So those two guys are a problem, and it's probably no coincidence that you have a dominant interior defensive lineman like that, and you're in the Super Bowl. I think whether you look at Aaron Donald with the Rams a few years back, having a guy like that makes a meaningful difference, and both teams do.
So, Dan, I want to use that conversation with Kirk Cousins to get into a wider discussion here about just the quarterback landscape heading into this offseason. As you think about teams specifically, is there a team out there whose quarterback situation you find most compelling as we get into free agency?
Well, Kirk Cousins is going to be an interesting name out there. It's just going to be who's going to be willing to take on that salary.
What do you think happens there? Because obviously the Falcons are going to sit there and say, well, we're not going to cut him. You're going to have to trade for him. And there are teams out there who are going to say, okay, well, we dare you to keep him on the roster, because if he does get released, you could have a Russell Wilson situation where he's available for the minimum. If he gets traded, you're taking on $30 million in base salary. This is very early, but do you have a sense of who you think is going to blink first as part of all of that?
I think the Falcons are going to try to make this work until they can't anymore. I know Kirk gets the sense, just through the interview, I feel like he knows that his days with Atlanta are probably over. So either way, I don't think he's going to be with the Falcons.
And other teams know that.
So
that affects how those
we can sit
conversations are gonna
here
go.
Super Bowl week together and say, we know that this is how this can work. Smarter people that are running organizations know that too. So the Russell Wilson example is perfect. And why wouldn't a team like the Cleveland Browns scoop him up? Kevin Stefanski, obviously familiar with Kirk Cousins. He was his offensive coordinator at one point when Kirk was in Minnesota, but before the Kevin O'Connell time. So to me, as we've talked about, and it's really become the theme of this week leading into the Super Bowl, is the desperate teams for quarterbacks. And Kirk Cousins is going to be an interesting name to watch as we see this unfold and patiently wait to see if the Falcons would cut him.
The Browns are a team I'm paying attention to just because they need an answer here, a quarterback, and a cheap answer. You and I talked a little bit earlier this week about potential landing spots for Matthew Stafford, veteran quarterback, Russell Wilson last year. What are the Steelers going to do at quarterback? That's something I'm keeping an eye on. And then if the Rams do move on from Matthew Stafford, they become arguably the most compelling destination for any quarterback because of how that offense is set up. And they're a team that anything is on the table for me. In the same way that the Stafford trade kind of blew us all away and took us by surprise, them moving on from Stafford and getting a little bit creative about what that next solution is, I'm going to be paying a lot of attention to that. That's what I'm focused on.
What's funny is we had no plans to really lean in on a lot of Rams talk here, but they're popping up in these conversations because there's some tentacles that they're touching.
Pivot points for them.
Correct.
There are just so many different ways they could go this offseason. We threw this out on our podcast we did on Sunday night. If they trade Matthew Stafford, do they become a Sam Darnold destination? And speaking of Sam Darnold, the other quarterback involved in all of this is what happens with Aaron Rodgers? Because I could understand the Jets landing in both spots with this where they say, listen, is it kind of a misalignment of eras where we were going for it and now we're not? And does Rodgers make sense for our current timeline? Maybe not, but we can't do better than him this offseason. I also understand people being like, why wouldn't you get a clean break? Why wouldn't you just step into the next era of the franchise with Aaron Glenn and not have this stuff hanging over you? So what happens with Aaron Rodgers? Kirk Cousins isn't the only veteran quarterback whose landing spot may dictate how this offseason goes.
I think Rodgers has to inform the New York Jets what he wants to do first, whether or not he wants to play football, because retirement is always on the table in general. Do I think that he will continue playing football? Absolutely. Could the Rams be a place that he'd want to play football if Matthew Stafford were to leave? I'm sure Sean McVay could get the most out of a 41-year-old quarterback. But I think they first have to figure out what he wants to do. And then, what's interesting about it is we don't know what Aaron Glenn wants at this point. All we can go by is what we know about the relationship between the Jets and Aaron Rodgers. And it's fine. I wouldn't say it's spectacular. I don't think Woody Johnson is sitting there going, Aaron Glenn, make this work. Bring Aaron Rodgers back. He's part of the Jets. This is why we traded for him. I think they really want to empower this new head coach and letting him make the decision. But I don't think Aaron Glenn is going to be okay with just Aaron Rodgers rolling it back the same way he did the last 2 years there, right? I'm talking about interviews that he did during the week, missing camp, all the things that are not going to belong on the watch of Aaron Glenn. I don't think he's going to allow that, because he knows in order to get control of this team, he's got to hold every single player accountable.
That's kind of why I land in a spot where it's like, why don't you just move on?
And
is this worth dealing with? And I understand, like Aaron Rodgers 5 years ago, if you're Matt LaFleur, it's like, all right, let's make this work because he can still play at an MVP level. Where you're at, if you're the Jets, I just think that being able to control what the building feels like, make it feel new, make it feel young, make it feel exciting.
He's too divisive.
Yes.
Right?
I just don't think the juice is worth the squeeze. I don't think the drawbacks to me outweigh the benefits from having him on this sort of team. If you're a team that is on the doorstep of a championship and you feel like Aaron Rodgers is the best we can do at the most important position in the sport, maybe you live with some of that other stuff. That's not where the Jets are. The Jets are starting over, and I just don't know if Aaron Rodgers at this stage is the quarterback you want to start over with.
Every candidate that interviewed for the Jets job was asked how they would handle Aaron Rodgers. What's your plan here? And most of the candidates were not afraid to say, I would move on from Aaron Rodgers. So most have leaned towards the way you look at it as, I want this thing to start fresh. He's too divisive. He's caused too many distractions. Let's just start this anew and rebuild this. But we'll see what Aaron Glenn winds up deciding, knowing that the quarterback market isn't very strong right now.
One of our listeners in the chat pointed out something important here with the Kirk Cousins situation is that he has a no trade clause, a full no trade clause. So he could also just determine where he wants to go if they ultimately have to trade him. Something that Kirk said to you, and I think is really important as we consider what he can be for his next team. The Achilles injury apparently didn't bother him that much this season, but he did have some upper body injuries, the shoulder injuries that he was dealing with. So I think you could pretty easily, if you're a team looking at $1 million worth of Kirk Cousins, if he gets cut, and say, well, he was hurt last year, he can be better for us this year. This is a worthwhile gamble for where we're sitting right now.
He also said that his ankle never went back to working the way your ankle's supposed to work.
Seems like an issue. Seems
like a problem when you're a quarterback. And when he said it, when we were talking, I had like a flashback to watching him in the pocket, and something always looked off. And I remember talking to people in Atlanta and talking to people close to Kirk at the time, and they just kept telling me, okay, he's not 100%, but he's healthy. Well, he wasn't, right? And I think this time in the offseason for him to get stronger and to give his body more rest, because I do think we're living in a time right now where these athletes are coming off these Achilles injuries, and we're just expecting them to bounce back much sooner than I think they really can.
The last domino that is going to be kind of something that dictates the way this offseason goes at the quarterback position is what happens with Sam Darnold. As you've started digging around about what the Sam Darnold market might look like as somebody who's 10 years younger than some of these guys we're discussing, what do you think how is that going to unfold as teams really start getting into, is this the right guy for us?
Yeah, well, let's just start with where he is right now. which is in Minnesota, and we saw what he was able to do there and how much they liked having Sam in the building. I don't think they're at a point, though, where they're pressed to bring him back. Like, they're pounding on the table of ownership going, let's just give this guy a long-term deal, paying him $45 million a year. Like, I don't think that's in the cards for them. I think their plan right now is to get J.J. McCarthy back on the field, get him ready, and use Daniel Jones. That move was made intentionally. That was not just a flyer. I'm like, let's just see. And I think Kevin O'Connell obviously has proven that he can get the most out of quarterbacks. So what does it look like for the rest of the league? Well, the theme, again, is just teams that need a quarterback. And they're all going to be interested to see what that price is going to be. And just like we're seeing in the draft, there could be some teams that overpay for Sam because they need it so bad. You've got the Raiders, the Giants, if they don't get someone that they want. That could be looking. The Tennessee Titans, let's just say they go best player and Will Levis isn't great. That could be an idea. And if that was their opinion,
they've got a ton of money. And if they wanted to do it, they could easily do it.
They could do it. So I think we're going to see a market for Sam Darnold, and this will probably be his best contract.
It was a notable year for some of these veteran quarterbacks that didn't hit the way that we wanted to. A lot of these rookie quarterbacks did hit the way that these teams wanted to. Jaden Daniels, and then the guy that you also talked to this morning, New England Patriots quarterback Drake Maye. Let's get to that discussion right here.
And I'm sure you're hearing so many stories, and you're hearing so many former Patriots like Julian Edelman and Matt. So many guys are just talking about who Mike Vrabel is. What's one thing you're looking forward to learning more about him, knowing that there's so many people around the league who've said such great things about him?
That's a great question. I think just his coaching style, how he kind of reaches out to different player groups and different position groups, and just kind of how he kind of reaches out to them and or plays kind of his role in the locker room. I think he's a player and knows what it's like to be in the locker room, and he's been a successful head coach of the Titans. So I think it's kind of interesting to see how he kind of goes about things and how he handles the quarterback room. So different kind of areas of kind of head coach that how you kind of fit in, or kind of your role if you're like hey, get on you and quarterbacks, or hey, the linebackers are my squad, or kind of what's his favorite position group. I think it's kind of cool to see how things play out.
All right, give me one thing looking back. I know I didn't get a chance to talk to you at the draft, but if I was talking to you then compared to who you are now, what's like the one thing after just playing one season in the NFL that you're like, yeah, I had no idea that this was part of it?
Ooh, no idea. God, you're asking some good questions. No idea this is part of it. I think just the amount of flow of kind of guys throughout the locker room, whether it's training camp and all the rookies and 30 other rookies I was with throughout mini camp and training camp that kind of sadly get cut, and how many guys are in throughout the week. And my center Ben Brown, we signed him on Wednesday and he started for us that Sunday and he balled out. So just kind of how the NFL works and how much of a things can turn and guys can be in and out, and really how much it is kind of a business side to it.
So the off season is always so valuable because everything slows down a bit for you, and you can kind of lock back into those things that you want to get better at, and go back to see some of the flaws from the season. Is there one part of your game that you're really locked in over the next few months to just make sure come training camp it's not a problem for you for next season?
Non-tangible things on the field, I think, just leadership wise, taking the next step of being the guy and getting a chance to kind of make more noise in the locker room, and it was tough to kind of speak up as a rookie. So just kind of taking that next step in that, and then from there, just I think football wise, quarterback wise, you always got to stay up to date on footwork and little things like that.
Yeah, that's always got to be a hard spot to be in, where you're the quarterback, so you're naturally the leader of the team, but you're 22 years old, you're the youngest guy out there, and all this is new. So in terms of just that confidence now stepping into this, do you feel that you're in a better position? And what is that style of leadership do you think that you lean towards? Like, how would I describe Drake Maye as a leader?
For sure. I think it's something that I got better as the year went on, but especially coming in mid-season, it's tough to kind of go in there, and you don't want to be the guy who's first start, kind of trying to take command and yelling at the group. But I think that sometimes towards the end of the season, the guys would have liked to see that from me. So kind of my style is just get to know the guys and kind of how can I reach kind of each position group different? How can I may be able to get on the tight ends, more. We got a veteran group I can kind of get in, kind of get into their gear and Hey, I may have to love up the linemen a little more. Obviously, the linemen, they like to be, kind of, loved on, and the work they do, speaks for itself. Golly, they got a tough job. So, hey, I may be able to tell the receivers, hey, get your stuff together, man. This isn't, how it goes. And they just kind of get to know, and kind of, I think the biggest thing for me is get to know them personally first before I kind of start taking, shots or jabs at their work life. So I think that's a big thing for me.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Speaking of work life, it's my job to find out information, but I have a feeling, I don't know, I want to ask you, did you know Belichick was getting the job at UNC before all of us? Like, did somebody like pass that along, or did you find out when we did?
Yeah, I had an idea. I
knew it. Scoop City, Drake Maye taking over as the host since he's got all the inside scoop. He knew Belichick was going there.
He's a player there. I mean, when you're a top 5 pick at quarterback, I think you probably carry a lot of weight back there.
That's why I asked him. I was like, come on, just break my heart. You knew. I wish he texted me and let me know. That being said, you can check out on the Scoop City YouTube page. We played this game with him called May or May Not. He's still so young, and the Boston media is tough. It's a tough place to play. So I don't think he ever gets to have that much fun. So we try to have a little fun. And he answered some good questions. He recently got engaged. So he's wedding planning. He's going to lean into that a little bit. But we asked him some questions just about the whole wedding situation. He's got 3 incredible brothers, all athletes. How do you pick a best man when you have 3 brothers?
So the way that I did it is, because I have 2 brothers, I just went with a friend. Because what can you do? There's no good decision. Yeah. So I think if you have more than one sibling, it allows you to step outside of the family and not hurt any feelings.
I've been to weddings where they make, like, it would be like in this example, make all 3 the best men, and then they're all up there and they have 3 speeches. It was horrible.
No, that's a mess. That's an absolute mess. That doesn't work out well for anybody.
It's a mess. And the New England Patriots hoping not to be a mess, right? They got tons of cap money to spend here in this offseason. And you and I have talked about this a lot during this coaching cycle about the coveted jobs. And, a lot of the feedback I got around the league about Drake Maye was coaches wanted to go there because of him. And just what a testament to his potential that we saw enough. By the way, this is a team that didn't even start him. Remember going back to training camp and they went with Jacoby Brissett in order to give the rookie some time to develop. But in the end, he did enough for those around the league to see and go, I can make this work. I can build around this, and which is why a lot of coaches wanted that job.
The way that you were framing it is that Drake Maye made the Patriots job the most attractive job in the cycle. As you look at the hires that have already happened in this head coaching cycle, if you had to pick one guy that you think was the best hire that a team made, who would you land on?
I would go with Ben Johnson with the Chicago Bears.
Oh, come on. Now you're just trying to curry favor over here. This place you acquire.
Look, this was the target from the start. And the fact that they were able to rein him in, despite the fact that Brady was trying his best to make a strong case why Vegas could be a place where he could really change the culture and develop into what he wants it to be, right? It was essentially control versus the quarterback, because he's not getting that kind of control in Chicago. He's going to have some of it and a heavy say, but Vegas was willing to be like, keys, go, there's the car. But with Caleb Williams going back to the idea of having a quarterback with talent, to pass on Caleb to go to the Raiders wasn't making a lot of sense to me at the time, but I understood the Brady element. So to me, just knowing that he has a plan in place, he's already making jabs at Matt LaFleur with the Packers, I'm all in on the attitude and the confidence that Ben Johnson's bringing.
When he said that in the opening press conference, and he's taking a shot at LaFleur specifically, people kind of freaked out about it. And my response was, well, they clearly are friends.
Yeah.
Like, why would you even think about saying that if you weren't buddies with the guy? And then it comes out that they don't know each other.
Love it.
That is shocking to me.
Love it.
I just assumed they were buddies.
Look, coming from the organization that has never beat the Packers like ever, so it's a strong take there to go hard and poke the bear, knowing poke the bear, knowing that the Bears have not been great against the Packers. But I liked it. Look, he's has a little bit of a Wonder Boy vibe about him already, just the way people around the league were talking about him. And what I really liked watching from afar were some of the decisions that he's made over the course of the last few seasons, trying to learn not only what it's like to deal with a team when they're losing and going through some tough losses, but also to be part of a team and an organization going through some of their wins. right?
He's seen it from every angle,
correct.
at every point in the timeline.
So much of being a leader is finding ways to deal with the successes, and the problems. And I think the fact that he was self-aware enough to go, I'm not ready. When most people in football get an opportunity to be a head coach, they will jump at it, whether they're ready or not. And so the fact that he took the time to make sure he internally feels ready already gives him the edge because he's comfortable.
You have to have a lot of ego to be an NFL head coach. But I think that a lot of guys run into problems because they have too much ego. They believe in themselves and their vision a little bit too much. And I think his willingness to take a step back and be realistic about where he was, whether this is me just being a Bears homer or not, it makes me feel a little bit more excited about the hire. And when you look at some of the other guys that have gotten these jobs, Pete Carroll, Mike Vrabel, Aaron Glenn, it all makes sense to me, right? I feel like they're steadying hands for organizations that need them. The reason that I think that Ben Johnson is the most important hire in the cycle is because it's not just about a steady handle. It feels transformative, potentially. When you think about the way the Bears have been talked about and the way that people kind of conceive of the organization, they're outdated, they're cheap, they're behind the times. Their willingness to be aggressive in this and to say, we're going to go get our guy. We're going to fly everybody private. We're going to shell out the money. I really do feel like it's an indication that they're potentially stepping into a different era of what we can expect from the brass there. And again, maybe this is a rationalization. Maybe I'm telling myself a story because I want it to be true. But there are glimmers of hope that this feels different for this team.
Well, as much as we're giving him credit for having self-reflection, maybe that's what we need to do with ownership with the Bears, right? So these are two sides coming together going, all right, I needed to make change or I needed to learn more. And it seems like a marriage that can work. I do not want to be at the Super Bowl next year with you, though, and playing this back and going, we were so hopeful for what this could be, and this was an absolute train wreck. And I don't think it's going to. I don't. And I'm not going to come up here and make bets that this is going to work, this isn't going to work. There's some of these hires that I feel strongly that they're going to be able to at least make this team better. He is one of them. Like Vrabel in New England. They're going to be a better team. These are the type of coaches that just don't know how to lose. They know how to prepare their men. And with Ben Johnson coming from really learning under Dan Campbell as much as he has, this is a team who knows how to figure out who they are quickly as an identity and have that demeanor about them that losing is not an option.
If we are sitting here a year from now and it's a disaster, I'm okay with that. Right? If it fails, at least they failed doing the right thing. At least they failed making the right bets.
Would you like to make a bet on that? Like how you would feel?
I'm maybe too process oriented, where I think that if you're doing the right things to try to get where you're going, that's all you can control.
So you give the Jets credit for making that trade for Aaron Rodgers? Like you think that was the right move and giving?
Yeah, I don't mind that.
I'm thinking of like recent situations where teams said we need to do this now.
My problem with the way the Bears have operated for way too long is that I think these moves have been rational and incremental, right? Like when they brought Matt Eberflus back last offseason, I did not like it because I thought this was shooting for the middle. Like what is the best case scenario for bringing him back and hiring a new offensive coordinator? I think you land somewhere in the middle. The Ben Johnson thing, if it goes right, the best case scenario, you're not in the middle. It's one of those guys who can really change the way that things feel. And these are big names to throw out there, but I think about what happened when McVay got to LA. I think about what Kyle Shanahan has been for the 49ers. And the Bears, Ben Johnson is that type of coach. He's that archetype of coach. Maybe it doesn't get there. Maybe it doesn't work out as well as those two have. But I think the bet itself and what you're trying to get out of it, that's what you should be shooting for. So even if you come up a little bit short, at least you were chasing the right thing. And too often in recent years, I just haven't felt like they were chasing the right thing.
They were in that vicious cycle that we reference all the time where no one, it's almost, have you ever tried to pull a Band-Aid off of a little kid? And because you feel bad, you don't want to rip it the way we rip it off each other as adults. I've had to do this with my sons where I do it slow and I realize that it's worse. Yeah. I got to just rip it. And it's sort of how the Bears have handled their business with their coaches over the last few seasons and their coordinators of they're trying to do it the way that they think is better, but in the end, it's the most painful.
You're just sitting there tinkering with the machine that's broken instead of just throwing the machine in the garbage and trying to build a new one. And I think that the Ben Johnson hire is an indication that they're trying to build a new machine in Chicago, and it's easy to get excited about that.
Just rip it.
Let's get to some of the comments, questions that we've gotten from you guys over the course of the live stream here. We sincerely appreciate that. I do not see it on the screen in front of me, unfortunately.
Oh, tell us our
we're
questions in our ear.
waiting to get to some of those questions. In your mind, is it possible for the 49ers to potentially make Brock Purdy play out his final season of his contract before they come to a solution? Or do you think this is something that gets handled for San Francisco before we get to the 2025 season?
I think that the San Francisco 49ers and Brock Purdy's camp are working on a contract sooner rather than later. I think it's something that we're going to be following probably over the next few weeks, actually. If they haven't already began, I can tell you, they've had conversations already. But to sit down and knock this thing out, I expect this to happen over the next few months here. So, no, to answer your question, I do not think that the San Francisco 49ers have some plan where they're going to let Brock play out this last year and then go after another quarterback at the end of that. No, I think for this they're locked in. They know he's the guy. They want to pay him. The question is how much. I think that's really what the next conversation is, because we know that he is proven to be a good quarterback. But do you think he's good enough to reset the market? Is he? And we could debate this all day. So I think the San Francisco 49ers want to approach this as, we are hoping that he's willing to give a little so they can continue fixing some of the roster, some of the salaries that they've going on, yet retain his services and not completely put them in a position where they can't really pay any big star players in the future. So we'll see if they'll be able to come to agreement. And just knowing Brock's personality and the way he handles this and how he sees it, I have a hard time believing that he's going to be banging on the table saying, make me $65 million a year.
Well, guess what? How many Toyotas does $65 million a year buy you? Because I think that's what we would find out if Brock Purdy ended up getting that contract. One of the quarterbacks we did not mention in the offseason discussion is Justin Fields. Noah T asked or said that he is interested in where Justin Fields may land this offseason. And he's kind of an interesting name because we've seen these reclamation projects of formerly highly drafted quarterbacks who did not work out at their previous stop. They get a chance at a second or third stop, and their story changes. Sam Darnold, Baker Mayfield. Do you think Justin Fields has a chance to be that guy for somebody this spring? And who do you think might be interested in making that happen?
I could see the Pittsburgh Steelers keeping Justin Fields for next season. And
I think Arthur Smith has really liked working with him.
Yeah, it was apparent.
Yeah.
Even Arthur joined Scoop City in the summer, and this was when we didn't know who the starter was going to be. And it was one of those where you're trying to listen to every single word and read and hear the tone. and he did a great job of keeping it pretty even. But there was something about the work Justin Fields was doing mentally that stood out to me in the interview that was impressing Arthur. Because think about what Justin had been through. How could you possibly walk into any room, walk on a field with confidence after what happened in Chicago? So the fact that he'd been working on himself so much and the Steelers were seeing growth in him, and that led me to believe that they believed in him almost a little bit more than he was believing in himself. So I think once Russell's out of the building, if that is the decision that they decide to make, and Justin continues to get another season in Pittsburgh with Arthur Smith, I think this is where we could see him really take some big steps. But let's just say they decide, all right, we just want to shed all these quarterbacks that we have right now and start. I don't know where they would go for one, but Matthew Stafford's available, right? Look, again, is this a move the Raiders make? Do they bring him in? This is a team that now with Brady having so much influence, they're not trying to rebuild at this point.
Actually, I'm very interested in the idea of Justin Fields in a Chip Kelly rushing game. I actually think that would be pretty fun. I've already signed up for that now that you mentioned it.
Yeah, so it makes all the sense. Chip Kelly, the highest paid offensive coordinator. I mean, we talk about owners changing their ways. You give Chicago credit for doing what they're doing with Ben Johnson and paying Chip Kelly $6 million to be the highest paid offensive coordinator. That's more than Liam Cohen was going to get.
It is the dream. Making $6 million a year
Vegas?
to be the offensive coordinator. You have one media appearance a week. No one's going to be calling for your job before they start calling for the head coach's job. Being able to be like the second or third guy on the totem pole and making $6 million a year, that's the dream. I'm so happy for Chip Kelly.
Yeah, that is always funny to hear when the coaches go back and forth. I talked to Bill O'Brien recently about that, of just the drain of the college space, yet it is so enjoyable for some coaches that like that college space, but the work is obviously very, very different. So again, I think the market for Justin Fields will be so much better this time around than what it was last. Do you remember at the combine, you and I were just talking and you kept pushing me to find out who the teams were calling the Bears to trade from. And I was like, Robert, nobody. I don't
think there were that many teams that needed a short-term answer at quarterback last year. I think there are more teams this year because of how dire the draft situation is, where these teams that need a short-term answer, I think they'd be willing to roll the dice on Justin Fields in a way they wouldn't have been last offseason just because there were more options.
Absolutely. And that's what we're going to see. This offseason is going to be completely focused on these bridge quarterbacks that are trying to fill some holes on these teams, trying to find their way and trying to find their next franchise guy.
Last one here. I have to do the food question because that's what I'm most excited about this week. Shady Carey asks, where are you most excited to eat this week? Do you have anything on your radar that you're excited about? I have 10 things that I can mention. Was
this Sherry that asked me this?
Shady Carey.
I love that she said most excited too, as if I haven't already dove in. If you follow me on Instagram, you will see I've been posting. I've become posting all my food. I never take pictures of my food. That's not my thing. I can't help but take pictures of it because I can't wait to look back on it and be like, oh my gosh, it was delicious.
So the reason I take pictures of my food is to remember it later.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Sometimes I post about it just like, this is where I am, look at me. But it's mostly because we eat out so often that I forget what I got at certain places. So when we're talking about meals, my wife and I'll go back and be like, oh yeah, remember when we ate at Oriole and we had this like cheese souffle, and I'll pull up a picture of it and we can have a reference.
That's a smart, mature reason. My reason is I eat my children's chicken nuggets and Uncrustables as my dinner. So I want to be able to look back and be like, there was a time this year that I enjoyed my meal and it was delicious. So that's why I've documented it. I also like to send it back to my family at home. Like, look what I'm eating right now, which I don't get much response back because nobody wants to hear about how much fun you're having.
A couple places I'm excited about for the rest of the week. There's a place called Mosquito Supper Club that does like a pescatarian kind of seafood tasting menu that's supposed to be really, really good. I'm very much looking forward to that. And then there's a Trinidadian place called Queen Trini Lisa that I'm very excited to go to at some point this weekend for lunch, maybe. So those are the two on my radar. But if you're interested in more New Orleans food recommendations, I put my whole list on Twitter last night for anybody that might be coming here in the near future. I'm not an expert, but those are the places that I plan to go, and I've put in a decent amount of research to try to get to that.
What list. I do love about the people who live in New Orleans, they are very comfortable asking you where you're going to eat and giving you recommendations and suggestions. So I absolutely can't wait to try all the places. The list is too long. I need more time to eat and less time to talk.
That is going to do it for The Athletic Live here on Tuesday at Radio Row in New Orleans. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. If you submitted questions, hung out with us, we really appreciate you spending the day with us. Tomorrow, we've got some more wonderful guests on tap. Jaden Daniels is going to be joining us. Christian Gonzalez is going to be joining us. It's going to be me, Derek Klassen, and Diana coming to you guys at 5 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. Until then, sincerely appreciate you guys tuning in. We'll talk to you soon. All right, 2 down.